My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
Welcome to a special edition of the Ankler Podcast. This is Sean McNulty of the Wake Up Newsletter here at the Ankler, and I'm joined by Elaine Low of the Series Business Newsletter, who recently did a panel at the NAB conference with some big hitters in the non-scripted space. Who'd you gather together for a chat there, Elaine?
Talked to some of our favorite executives behind shows like Welcome to Wrexham and the revival of Duck Dynasty. There was Andrew Freed, founder and CEO of Boardwalk Pictures, Jen O'Connell, co-founder of Velvet Hammer Media and the CEO of Pantheon Media, Howard Owens, the founder and co-CEO of Propagate, and Courtney White, the president of entertainment at Wheelhouse. It was a really good group to talk to about the state of non-scripted and reality shows right now, which are having a moment.
Yeah, definitely some heavy hitters there. It's great. I mean, the past 3 years alone, from the huge volume decreases from the streaming pullback to not quite a huge boom that we were expecting from the strikes, Elaine, in the unscripted space, and then the subsequent, kind of production exodus from LA also factoring in there. So what's front of mind with these insiders?
Well, they were talking to me about the demand, what's buying, what's selling, obviously, which is stuff that our listeners like to hear about, as well as what they see working in the future. It was a great little discussion to have on the stage at NAB in Vegas.
All right, let's get to it. Here's Elaine's conversation, diving into all things non-scripted from the NAB conference.
Welcome to Reality Check, the new rules of unscripted TV.
Hi, welcome everyone. So, to be real for a moment, speaking of reality TV, it's been a really tough time for the industry. How would you characterize the health of the non-scripted market in particular? Courtney, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I think it's going through an adjustment. And so we're in this period where I think we used to be serving a lot of cable networks that had 24 hours, 365 days to fill. And it was about enough content to keep that schedule really fresh. I think the whole business is changing where people are on demand streaming. And there's not necessarily a need for you to have a whole bunch of content to fill every hour of every day. And it's more about creating these big buzzy events more than about volume. So I think we're going from this real adjustment in terms of how many shows are being created, and then the balance between something new and buzzy and something that's a standby. I think renewals are harder and the volume game is harder. So I think we're adjusting to the way that customers are watching content, and it's all funneling down from there to really impact how the business is run. Mm-hmm. So we're in the midst of this adjustment, which I think in the end of the day, I think it's actually really good for the consumer and great for, you're seeing some really quality stuff, but it can be tough for the business that's just used to a whole lot more hours being made.
What about from your vantage point, Howard?
I think that what Courtney said is correct. I also feel that, with that change in the ecosystem from there being a ton of cable players who needed content and needed new shows and had, hundreds of hours to fill, to those places really being more rerun based and more, not as prioritizing big original content. There is a much smaller ecosystem now, which is really the streamers and a couple cablers. But with that, one of the issues is the only place that really feels to me that really prioritizes reality right now is Netflix. If you look at a company like that, they have tons of buyers. They have, a plethora of creative execs. And, Hulu's done some super cool stuff. But the networks have kind of really slowed down. And they were a big player for broadcast, for reality. And you could really launch a hit there that could be global. So there's just not as much of it, but I think that it's so necessary. And if, Netflix being kind of the premier global streamer should tell you something about how much they value reality and unscripted and how much that has contributed to the success of their service. I think hopefully, now that we're coming out of what feels like, the nadir of kind of the programming world and how post-COVID and post-valuations of streamers have blown up, I'm hoping that we see a different kinds of prioritization with it. Sorry.
Not at all. I agree with everything you just said. I will say it's a time that we have to all be super scrappy. I mean, Courtney and I each have 2 jobs, so if that tells you anything, we'll take the work where we can get it. But I think that despite a rough couple of years, because it's been, especially last year, it's been really tough and slow going, it feels like there's some optimism right now. And the buyers are coming out, the streamers, they're probably buying the most, and the broadcast network second. And then with cable, there's still a lot of cable opportunities, and cable still makes money for themselves. But I'm finding that a lot of times the orders that used to be volume orders are smaller, so that volume business isn't really helping those companies that really thrived in that world. And so we all have to be super nimble and partner on projects, but partnering kind of diminishes your production fees, so that gets tricky. But despite all of it, there's definitely a lot of hurdles that we're facing, but I do feel like the top of this year, things started to pick up, and I think it'll continue to pick up. Maybe because they ran out of content, because they weren't buying as much before. But I do feel like we're kind of getting the business back more than it was last year.
Yeah, I think the consolidation that has happened, and just there's fewer slots, there's fewer shows. We're competing against each other. We're competing against ourselves, right? If we're lucky enough to sell somebody a show on a Tuesday, we're not selling them another show then for a minute, because everyone's just buying less. And so for us, it's become an exercise in being big. Like, there are wins, but it's how we've adjusted to this new marketplace for sure.
And, when we talk about the non-scripted market, that really covers so many different categories, right? We're talking about documentaries, game shows, competition shows, reality shows. Is there anything that's particularly in demand right now? Is there something that's really working with the viewer?
I mean, I'll say, I think nostalgia bombs, that's what I call them at home. And that could be a documentary, like, the We Are the World documentary. I forget the name of it, but
Greatest Night in Pop.
Yes, The Greatest Night in Pop. So good. Reboots. I know Courtney has a reboot, and there's a lot of others. I know there's sports docs. I just think anything that makes you feel good because it's nostalgic. For the first time as a Gen Xer, I feel seen in a long time, because everything's been about, all of the younger generations. But I do think nostalgia, in any way you can find it, is even like Deal or No Deal Island. People, it was, kind of a funny hybrid of a show, but I think just the name Deal or No Deal got people excited. So I think anything nostalgic in one way or another is hitting.
And I think that's true, and I think it's kind of sad and a little bit of state of the business whereby everything needs to be, the Mansons, which were 50 years ago, or, stories that we've seen from the 80s, 90s, in aughts, and they're redoing them. And it's a little bit like, everything trickles down. It's a little bit like the motion picture business, where you're really only seeing films based on IP being invested in heavily. And so there's this trickle down, and the hope is that as the content economy comes back, that there is an investment in fresh, creative, new ideas. And I think a lot of those tend to come from the unscripted space traditionally. So that's what we're hoping, I think.
Yeah, we're finding the biggest risk that appetite on behalf of buyers is really coming in the global format space. So when we can come in with a really well thought out, fresh, new take on a format that has global legs, that's been able to captivate the buyership.
And we talk a lot, I cover both the scripted and the non-scripted space, and I feel like across the board, there's always this talk of doing more with less, How has that impacted your work over the last couple of years? Is that something that you're all feeling acutely as well?
I think that was always part of the appeal of what our side of the business is versus our scripted counterparts, right? We can do it faster, we can do it more efficiently. It's instant gratification for what we do. But then even within that, yeah, there is, it's shoot days and edit weeks, right? That's the only way to get these things cheaper. And so when you start to crunch that down, yeah, we're trying to be more scrappy and we're trying to figure out innovative ways to do things. But
I just want to add, I mentioned it before, but yes, we grew up in this business scrappy and having to do less for more, every single one of us. And it's getting really tricky because when the networks buy less, we're not allowed to amortize anything, as well as we used to be able to. And so it's really hard. So that means squeezing our crews. That means people don't get paid as much. It's non-union. We're shooting outside of the country now more than ever. So we have to find all these other ways to make up for it when we're not given, the budgets that we used to have.
And I think Jen said it, we all here grew up in the business and have been at this for a while. It is a mature business. So not unlike other businesses, of course, you're going to have to do more with less. That's what happens when, we've had this wild ride with content. And for the last 30 years, really, there's been just a sea change in how much different kinds of content have been made. So I think it's incumbent on us to be more creative. We're trying to take fewer bets and take bigger bets in development and more surgical and more targeted. And it's a lot riskier, but also hoping, maybe we get into it later, it could be more lucrative, depending on how much you're willing to invest on the front end.
Are there any particular projects that come to mind, that you've sort of created perhaps like a new emerging model with, or, you've done in a faster period of time that has really hit?
Well, I think more from a creative standpoint than a workflow standpoint, but we produced the series Welcome to Wrexham, which is about Rob McElhenney and Ryan Reynolds having bought this soccer team in Wales. And I think we approached it season 1 as a documentary in the purest sense. Let's grab cameras and film as many days with all of these people as possible and then sort of figure out what that story is and how it breaks out over the 8 episodes. We realized after making the show a little bit that when you have talent like Rob and Ryan, you're able to shoot some scenes and then sit them in a chair and have them talk about it. And it almost becomes far more of a hybrid. Like sometimes I feel like we're making a future version of The Office rather than a documentary. But so yes, there are efficiencies in that, but it's been more of a creative adjustment than a practical one.
I think also our model at Wheelhouse, and I'll just use an example, we recently launched a label called Twist, which is a crime label run by Jane Latman, who came over from the network side. And the way that we're operating there is, we've got this centralized system of production management, of resources, and somebody like Jane who's starting a company can plug into this shared infrastructure, which is far more efficient for her than building out on her own. So, the consolidation that we're seeing everywhere, what we're trying to do is say, okay, who are creatives who could plug into our system? And through us working, we're right now 7 different labels, sharing resources. How can we help make this make economic sense? Have each label work independently, creatively, but share overhead costs so that we can just make it more efficient and let those creatives make the kinds of shows they want to make. Because to Jen's point, we're all raised scrappy, but that scrappiness was also predicated on the volume that's non-existent now.
And then on the brands front, we just hired someone, Kelly Mullen, who's amazing, and she has direct relationships with brands. So everyone's talking about brand-sponsored content, and we are too. And I think a lot of us are hoping that, that part of the business will grow. So we're really hustling with these brands to say to them, if you have content you need us to make for you, even if we don't need a platform, it's their own platform, we're here, but also help us, we have these projects. tack on, contribute, and help us go to the network with a little bit of funding to make it more appealing. I mean, Howard, you've been in that business forever, in the brand business, even back when I was in
the restaurant,
DC.
I mean, the hope is that the brands will become more involved. I feel like we've been hoping that for 30 years. And to really see it happen, what we don't want to do is make commercials and become advertisers, ad makers. No insult to them. They're great at what they are, but it's not what we do. So hopefully there is a need for financing at basically every place, not Netflix, Apple, or Amazon. Everyone else could use some money. And they're all ad supported. So the goal is to really, get advertisers to be part of the conversation instead of being on the outside looking in.
But I think whether it's with advertisers or not, it still is the same conversation, right? Like, it still has to be that race to the top, right? It has to be huge. It has to be undeniable. It has to be, because yes, the brands will come with money, and the networks presumably at some point will get on board. Even the streamers will get on board, hopefully. And it still has to be that undeniable big thing that, oh, by the way, I happen to have all this money for it also.
And I feel like that. I feel like we don't want to be making shows for less. We've been doing that. That's what reality's been. We want to take huge swings, swing for the fences, and be able to make a ton of money on incredible creative and sell it all over the world. But it's become harder, and I think the four of us here are good at it, though.
But I think like one of our filters for taking on new shows now is to actually say, like, why is this a TV show? Is it still a TV show? There are a lot of things that used to be TV shows that just aren't anymore. They're on YouTube, or they're on TikTok, or they're on any number of platforms, or they're an awesome podcast, like an awesome podcast. And so, yeah, I think if we're always, again, for us by exercise, we're always just trying to say, how big can this be? And if it doesn't get to that conversation, then maybe it should be something else. And that's okay too.
And let's talk about that word undeniable, because I think we hear that a lot in the industry, right? It's like it has to be undeniable. But what does that mean? Like, what is the criteria for undeniable in 2025?
I mean, you know it when you see it a little bit, right? But like, we talk at Boardwalk a lot about if you can't get somebody excited about the subject line of your email, then it's probably an uphill battle.
I like that criteria.
True.
That's, yeah.
Right? Like, because now I'm in the business of convincing you of something. And I don't want to convince you of something. I want you to convince me that you're more excited than the network next door or the streamer next door. And so that's undeniable.
I also think that there's a lot of expectation for, big IP going back to reboots and all of that, big talent. But I think talent has to be on camera. I think the days of this big talent's on board as an EP, but they'll promote it that's not undeniable. They have to actually be on camera in a meaningful way, not a put their rubber stamp on it kind of a way. And then just like you said, a big noisy log line, a big hook that people feel like they haven't seen before or haven't seen it in this way. To me, it's those three things.
And, Andrew, going back to something you were saying about TikTok and whether something's right for a TV show versus a podcast or a TikTok, let's talk a little bit about the attention economy, because really TV isn't competing with just TV. It's competing with YouTube. It's competing with TikTok and Instagram. How does that inform the way you all think about programming and what you're developing?
I think about it all the time. Again, the question that I said, like, does this have to be a TV show? Can it be anything else? And would it be, not to be Pollyannish about it, but like, would it be more fun to do it a different way? Like, there are requirements of a TV show. We just released a series called Paul American with Max. Jake and Logan Paul are the stars of the show, and they obviously are creators in a creator economy. We had to say to ourselves over and over again, what makes this a TV show? What makes this special? What makes this connection deeper? What makes the characters more vulnerable? What makes it feel bigger and louder and cooler and more relevant? Because it's slower, right? Like, the episode that will premiere Thursday happened months ago. And so what's going to get this audience that can see Jake and Logan Paul every day and see fresh content from them? What's going to get that audience and the other audience, people my age who are curious about them, hopefully, to like actually press play on their Max app?
And I think there's been a long reticence or fear that the social economy and the social influencers have not translated to TV by and large. But I think it's starting to happen. And Paul American, I mean, those guys work wherever they go. One of our talent management firms, Select Management, which is the leading talent management influencer company, represents the Mormon moms. And when they were about to go out and pitch the show, Secret Life of Mormon Moms, the thought was talk about undeniable. I don't know about you guys, but I think Mormon moms always work. Right? You're watching the Mormon moms.
Agreed.
And when we're in development, because we also make podcasts and we also do straight to YouTube content. And so for us, we have an exercise where we make the tile on the streaming service. So just as for us to say to ourselves, can this hold up? What is the image and the title of this show that makes it an obvious show that gets people excited? Would it hold up to the other things that we're clicking on Netflix or wherever? So, and if it's not that, it might make a great, to Andrew's point, story somewhere else. So we're making it for everywhere. We're thinking about it for everywhere, but it's a question of what is the best platform for that story? And for it to be undeniable, we always think about the buyer too, getting the buyer in the mindset of, if I don't jump on this now, the next place they pitch it is going to buy it immediately. So I need to get activated. So that's our hope when we go out, is to gin up that excitement.
When you think about the influencer space, I mean, yes, we have Paul American. We've seen the success of Mr. Beast and, his $100 million deal over at Amazon. What do you think about when it... Well, I suppose that is a good question.
I just am unclear about, I don't know, has the show worked?
Well, I guess it's worked enough to get a renewal, right? So by their metrics, however they slice and dice it.
If you spend $100 million, you got to renew it, right?
Well, actually, let's get into that then. How do you know what success looks like in the streaming age when these metrics aren't like they used to be? It's a little different than it used to be on linear, right?
I said to Courtney upstairs that the only metric that seems to matter, at least to me, is if they want more. Like, that's it. So
exactly.
What else matters?
Jen O'Connell and I were arguing about the Netflix top 10 and how legit that is. And I argue that it is legit because a lot of times you see up there movies from 2020 or, old TV shows that are licensed. So I feel like that is a pretty good indicator.
I'm sure it's legit. I'm not saying they're lying.
I didn't say we were just talking about it. I didn't say you were arguing.
I mean, the Netflix is like a huge client, guys. I'm not saying. No, I know I'm teasing you, but I do think that the way that they market their platform, so who's ever in that hero above the top 10 list, that placement and what they do and how many times they resurface that tile in different areas on the platform all leads to that top 10 list. That all the titles don't get fair treatment. And I'm speaking from experience with my past job at HBO Max. We used to fight over placement and who was getting that hero at the top because we knew what a huge impact it made. So if you kind of calculate how many times that tile is in the hero and then, where it ends up, I think you can see there's definitely a strong correlation there.
And I'm sure Mr. Beast was a huge hit. I mean, it only makes sense, right? But we just don't know.
Yeah. Oh, well, and every streamer counts a view. Like, what are they counting as a view? And sometimes with Netflix, it's changed over the years. And yeah, that thing about where they're placing it on the homepage, what you're clicking on, what they're surfacing. How much of a pain point is that when you do sell a show? I mean, what other kinds of further negotiations are there with, like, can we get it on the homepage?
I've never entered into that type of conversation, but it's a good idea, right?
Is that beyond your control, or is that something that you have discussions
I
about?
feel like our job is to package the show, pitch, sell the show, make the show. And after that, it's a little bit out of our hands.
No, you got to go after it, Andrew. You got to go after it.
Well, Jen knows.
No, but I think Courtney said it too. It's like, in Andrew, you guys saying the same thing. It's that you have to have two people want the same thing, or it's like, selling a house. one person wants it, they have to at least think someone else wants it. And that's where you get into the fact that the more money they pay, the more likely they are to market it heavily. And the bigger the investment they make, the better we feel about the potential outcome.
And when there's multiple partners interested, that's when you're able to really get granular and say, okay, how is this going to look? What are your plans and what are you going to market? And when you have multiple buyers at the table, that's a great point for us to go in and specify that. Without that,
good luck.
We're not, yeah.
Well, when we were in marketing meetings in my old job, the producers would come to me and say, okay, like I want billboards outside and I want this and I want that. And I would say, listen, in these marketing meetings, billboards are for us. They're so we can like drive home from work and feel really special. But that is not reaching that many people. So I would tell my producers, when you go in that room, you have to ask about placement for that tile. And you have to like push for other things like what are we doing on social? And I do think that's part of our job now is to be the squeaky wheel to get noticed, because even though we might not be making as much content as we were a couple of years ago, it's still so easy to get lost. So the pitch, delivering it is like, you're not done yet. You really have to get in there and hustle.
Noted.
I got your back.
Good tips coming out of this panel. How much data are you guys able to extract from streamers? Like, do they give you, like, what kind of feedback do you get? I've heard before that at Netflix, at least for a time, I don't know if it's still that way, showrunners I talked to would say, well, they wouldn't tell me exactly what the numbers were, but they tell me how it fared compared to a different show in a similar genre.
No, I think we get real numbers. It's just the numbers that they decide to give us. But there are numbers.
Time spent viewing is a big one. They really determine how long a customer watches the show to completion, how many people do watch to completion. That is generally a big barometer for success and something they target and share with us. Because in the event that people are checking out a specific time, Untold, a series we make for Netflix, is their sports documentaries, and we had this beautiful opening title credit sequence that had all of our names on it and incredible music. And Netflix is like, yeah, that's not working. You're losing 8% of your audience before you even, get to the. So we're like, okay.
Waiting for the best deals? Spring Black Friday savings are here. Shop early access now at Blinds.com and save big on new custom window treatments. Blinds.com makes upgrading your window treatments easy with free virtual consultations, free samples sent to your door, and professional measure and installation services. Plus, you always get Blinds.com's 100% satisfaction guarantee. Shop Blinds.com's Spring Black Friday early access now. Save up to 40% with minimum purchase, plus a free measure. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Speaking of sports documentaries, this seems like a perfect time. Sports docs are really having a moment. Both documentaries about sports teams or the Beckham doc, which I watched the hell out of, mainly for Posh Spice, but then actually was interested in Beckham. Tell me about the demand for sports docs and sort of shoulder content to a lot of live sports that streamers are investing in now.
I would like to take a little credit for the resurgence in sports docs. I devised an idea called Untold, which I felt that 30 for 30s on ESPN had gotten stale. And one of the reasons I felt like they had kind of gotten a little weaker is because Netflix is so heavily embedded with the leagues, with the NFL, with the NBA, with NHL, MLB. They broadcast their games. They're contingent on their access for what they do for a living. So we created this very cool series and went to Netflix, and they bought it and they really got behind it. And I feel like we made some very provocative shows that, like, one of them in the first season was called Malice in the Palace, which was about a famous fight that took place between two teams, and they were suspended, and there were racial overtones and undertones, and the NBA never wanted to license the footage for the story to be told. And we went to Netflix and we just made it. And they,
by the way, sorry to interrupt, I had pitched that as a 30 for 30, and they were like, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, but they were like, no way. There's no way that ESPN could have stepped up into the NBA office and said, here's the doc we're going to make. So you're right.
Netflix had the courage to make it, and that really set us off. And I think subsequently there have been a lot of huge sports stocks that have been successful, not the least of which is, the Jordan Last Dance, which is incredible. But I think, to what Andrew's saying now, unless you have the Dallas Cowboys or unless you have Tom Brady, it's very hard to sell a sports stock.
Also, let's talk about AI for a hot second here, because when anybody talks about entertainment these days, it's hard to avoid this topic. How is it impacting what you all do? Do you see it more as a challenge, as an opportunity?
I see it as an opportunity, but also something that has to be done with caution and with respect when it comes to dealing with talent. We use it all the time when we make development decks. That's like the easy, feels very safe and fun, but definitely has made our lives better. And we're just, we can get to market faster because AI is there helping us with, with the formats when it comes to like imagery and everything. We use it for transcription. And I think that's really helpful. And then if we're allowed, if it makes sense, and if talent has approved, if we're in post, for example, and our talent is not available to redo something or add something, we can use AI to help with the voice adding in. But we would only do that, with everyone's like full cooperation and approvals. We would never do that without having them on board. But it can save time and be very helpful.
And we're using it for some archive resources and for some recreation purposes very transparently, and also only in ways that, aren't infringing on rights as it relates to the archive, and on the recreations, not taking a job away from someone, not taking a job away from a SAG actor or something like that. So we're treading carefully, but I think all of us up here and the best of the people in our industry are innovators and have always pushed the barriers forward. And I think AI presents an incredible opportunity and challenge for the survival of our biz.
Well, I think it's going to be workflow based also, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I think so much of what we do in the nonfiction space takes place in actual environments, right? We're filming in environments that we don't control, both from a picture standpoint, but from an audio standpoint. And so I think those tools, at least for us thus far, have been really, really helpful.
I think it also presents a huge opportunity for the next generation. So I think, traditionally, young people come into an organization, they're trained by the older organization how to do things. And for the next generation to be really savvy in what AI tools can be useful, I think that's a real opportunity for this next generation to come into the workplace really empowered. So I'm excited to see that.
Howard, what kind of reenactments can you give us an example of something that, you wouldn't be able to get like a SAG-AFTRA actor for that AI might be a better fit for?
Well, something like if there is an old, I'm making this up a little bit, but let's say, there's that one iconic old picture of the Loch Ness Monster. And it's that fadey, grainy thing that was on the cover of, 100 National Enquirers. That form all of our opinion of what the Loch Ness Monster is. Via AI, you can take the basis of that image and you can create a moving image, and you can make it impressionistic, you can make it animated, you can bring it to life in a way that you otherwise could not. I'm not doing that to that image in the event there is a rights holder in the room, but there are ways to be creative and just make things come to life that you otherwise could not do before.
And then as we wrap our time here, I want to know what makes you excited, whether it's the kind of format or program that you're interested in developing more of, that you wish, buyers would be more interested in. Are there any kinds of emerging business models that you see potentially working? Tell us about what you see in the next year or two happening.
I mean, I'm really excited for the partnerships that are happening right now, working with huge talent. Tyler Perry wants to be in the unscripted business. We have a joint venture with him as an example. And, whether it be musicians, actors, athletes, people traditionally working in other forms of entertainment, I just feel like with unscripted right now, there is an appetite for people to do more. So I'm excited to see who else is out there that wants to do what we do and work with us.
And what about, live events or?
Oh, yes. We have a company under the Pantheon umbrella, Done and Dusted, and they do every kind of live event. They do award shows. They do, installations. For years, they were doing the Victoria's Secret fashion show, actually, and it went quiet for a couple years, and then last year they brought it back, but they did it as a digital-first live event. And so what I love about it is it was never intended to they didn't do the normal pitching it around town. Victoria's Secret was the client. They live streamed to YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and Amazon Live that came in as a last minute partner for shopping purposes. And the fact that 22 million people watched that live, that's huge. And, and that is just people seeing this because they follow one of Victoria's Secret's handles or the models that participated. And, I see this as a huge success. The budget was the same as it would be if it aired on a broadcast network. And the fact that, 1.2 billion total engagements were had off of this one event is great. And others out there, but Done and Dusted, they're the best at kind of creating a huge event and, bringing people to the table. So I think that we're all kind of thinking about what are other events like this that can go digital first and have that kind of be part of the menu of what we provide to consumers.
I agree. I think that vertical approach where it's a show that begets a podcast and an experiential and really thinking about shows and experiences and talent and concepts like that. So we're building out businesses beyond just the show. And maybe that's where the new volume lies. Instead of the number of episodes, when you have a hit, you're able to tell that story in various different places in various different ways and broaden out your business that way.
I mean, I might be a little romantic to think that, I'd love to go back to a day where TV in particular creates stars. And it's used as a discovery mechanism to see new ideas and find new people that you fall in love with. I love a great celebrity partnership and attachment, but I'm also a little over the celebrity being wedged into a TV show that feels like whatever. They could be there. Like the partnership on Wrexham is a great example of guys who are really into it. The TV landscape is littered with shows where there's a celebrity shoehorned into it, and it's like, who cares? So I'm a little over that, and I'm hoping to find some new faces, some new ideas, and new hooks and networks that'll take a chance on originality.
When those big names come knocking on your door, just send them my way.
They don't come knocking on my door. You get them. That's why I don't.
Yeah, I think I'm excited to see sort of as all these things continue to merge, right? Like there was a while, I think of the spectrum we're on here, my company probably was the farthest towards the documentary side of things. We don't say the word premium anymore because it just sounds real expensive, but that's probably what we were for a little while, premium. And we used to say, documentary is going to become the mainstream entertainment business. Like it's just moving towards that. And I think that has happened, right? Like these genres are bending and crossing over into each other. And so I'm excited to see how that continues to take shape. This Boston Red Sox show in many ways feels like a scripted movie that we happen to get the dugout at Fenway Park for. And we happened to shoot it during last year's baseball season. But like, it's just all merging in a very exciting, creative way. And I'm excited to see that convergence even further.
And I would also say that it would be great to see, and I'm seeing some of it break through the JB Smoove show on Amazon, but to see some, transaction, to see unscripted result in other elements. When we created The Biggest Loser many moons ago, we had a Biggest Loser weight loss club. Thank you, Jen. We had a Biggest Loser weight loss club, and the network executive at the time, not Jen, someone else said, we want to offer the audience the ability to buy weight loss programs. And they were like, yeah, you'll get 500 people. And we had 6,000 people the first week. and it grew. And I think with the connectivity and with technology, it would be great to create more opportunistic sell-through experiences for consumers. You can watch, you can actually participate, and perhaps buy. But I'm hoping that could be a next stage and a lucrative one.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for your time, and hope you all enjoyed our panel. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you, Elaine.